It's now when going live, but we are live. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, anyone watching now live or later on. It is my absolute pleasure and an honor to be joined by the man behind the legend, Mr. Sandy Petersen. How are you, sir?
Hello, all. I'm excited to be talking on this chat. I've been to Spain several times. My wife lived in Spain for 6 months in the 70s and in Portugal for a year and a half. And she speaks Spanish and Portuguese quite well. She
All
was
right.
raised as a little girl in Chile. Their parents were Americans living in Chile, but she went to the Spanish language school, so she speaks Spanish quite well. But as she puts it, she knows all the words that an 11-year-old girl would know, because that's when she left. So
Okay.
doesn't know any cuss words,
There seems to be recently a bit of a Spanish connection in my channel because last week, no, 2 weeks ago, I was interviewing Tim Powers, the fantasy author, and his wife apparently is Spanish as well. I didn't know that. So he's also been
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, news to me. He told me, and apparently he's also been traveling to Spain to the Semana Negra, the Black Week, the crime and fantasy writing thing in, I think, Avilés, Gijón as well, where you'd be going later this year. So seems to be a thing.
Yeah, no, I've been a fan of Tim Powers since the Drawing of the Dark back in 1979. So
Wow. No, we had almost a 2-hour conversation a couple of weeks ago, and it was
nice.
fantastic listening to him talk, and I got him to rank all his novels and stuff, so it was good fun.
Yes.
Right. So I've got a question for you to get this started, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If your Wikipedia page is true, you went to university and you majored in zoology.
I cannot speak as to whether my Wikipedia page is true because you are not allowed to edit your own Wikipedia page. I found this out, or no family members can't either. I found this out when I was teaching college, and some disgruntled students who I had given a bad grade went to the Wikipedia page and they edited it so that I was bad. And I couldn't change it. But then the next year, the students liked me, then they went back and fixed it. But nonetheless, despite such events, I did go to college and I did major in zoology. And I even went to a couple of years of graduate school, though I did not get a graduate degree. Zoology was what I studied. And occasionally it appears in my writing. Well, not occasionally. I'd like to sneak things in about it. But I will say this: when I was at Microprose Software, that was one of the first game companies to bring in separate game designers. I mean, separate from artists and programmers, to have actual designers that just did design. And the designers, of course, we'd all hang out together. And they did we all got together in our designers club, and we said, what did you guys all study in college? And I studied zoology, another one that studied history, another one English, another one music, and economics, and all these different things. None of us have studied the same thing, right? And but we were interested in what everyone else has studied. So what we decided was that what might be a trait of a good designer, or at least some good designers, is that you're interested in a lot of different things. And while I liked zoology a little more than history or English or music, it just like it happened to be that I did zoology, and that we all were kind of generalists doing a lot of things, as opposed to a programmer who the best programmers are blinders on just on the one, like John Carmack, as he just has his fixed thing, and that works great for them. But for a designer, you want to have a lot of stuff to draw on, I think. And that's so yes, I did study zoology. I especially liked not like vertebrates, like mammals and birds. It was like insects and spiders and sea life, weird things, which obviously has played a role in my games. And I was naturally attracted to Lovecraft, partly because his creatures are not like, when he has an alien, it's not like a dude with a dog head or something, right? It's like really weird. Or like a Klingon, which is basically a human with a crinkled French fry on his nose. Lovecraft's guys are like echinoderms, like starfish, and all kinds of crazy stuff, which I loved. It made them actually seem pretty realistic compared to the aliens that other authors of his time put forward. His were not at all like Earth life, and I really appreciated that.
So here's the question then. So how do you go from studying zoology and ending up working at Chaosium?
Well, what happened
doesn't seem like a straightforward career path.
Okay, so here I am I had written the game, The Call of Cthulhu for Chaosium already, okay, and some other smaller items. And they were in process of publishing it. Meanwhile, I'm going to school in California with my family, my wife and my son, and eventually my daughter, and eventually my son. And I needed some way to support myself while I was going to school, right? It's not, I needed money. So because I knew Chaosium and they liked me, I got a job typesetting manuscripts for them in their office. And I would also edit the manuscripts as I typeset them, which they liked. So I edited, and so a lot of the things that you see coming out of Chaosium from about 1981 through 1987 are things that I typed in by hand and on an old-fashioned typesetting machine. And what eventually happened is that my work for Chaosium became more and more interesting, and my graduate school became less and less interesting, and eventually my hobby became my vocation, and I switched. And Wendy, my wife, has said that she was really upset when I dropped out of graduate school. She's like, "What are we going to do? He's not going to have a career as a professor teaching zoology," which I didn't. But then, she really likes what turned out. Because one of the things is I get invited to conventions around the world. Like I said, Spain so far. This will be my 4th time I've gone to Spain this summer. This time is to Aviles. And the rule is I always, they ask me what I charge to go, and it's always bring my wife along with me. And usually the convention is like that because it's cheaper than paying me an honorarium, and then my wife loves it, So yeah. It's win-win for everyone.
Fantastic.
I get to go and sit in a windowless room with a bunch of nerds, and Wendy gets to go and play in the city. So yeah, we both do what we want.
Yeah. It's always, as my wife always tells me, happy wife, happy life.
Yes.
So getting a little bit into the nuts and bolts of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game.
Okay.
At the time the first edition came out, I mean, obviously Dungeons and Dragons have been around for maybe, I don't know, 6-7 years. Maybe there were a few other games, but there weren't very many. The game design, the game system was very influenced by RuneQuest.
Yes. What happened is that Chaosium there's actually quite a few role-playing games that came out in the 70s after D&D appeared. Most of them were very, very small sales, but there was dozens of these little things. And but none of them were a horror game. Okay. There was gangsters, and there was Wild West, and there was lots of fantasy games and science fiction. But Chaosium, what had happened is that before I was in with Chaosium, I was designing a role-playing game, not to publish, just for me and my friends, and we called it American Gothic. And it was a horror role-playing game, modern age with monsters. It wasn't specifically Lovecraft, though I obviously put Lovecraft monsters in it. Okay. And if you've ever played the famous scenario, The Haunting, for Cthulhu, that was originally designed for American Gothic, the scenario. So that's why it doesn't have that much Lovecraft stuff in it. But it also serves a good bit. Anyway, so I designed American Gothic, and then I started talking with Chaosium, and then they wanted me to do a horror game using their basic role-playing system, which was essentially a simplified version of RuneQuest. And so, I mean, my American Gothic system wasn't that great. So yeah, I used basic role-playing and fit Cthulhu into it. And it took me a year to write on a typewriter. I didn't have a word processor. And we just had to type it kind of on the fly. And the two toughest parts of it for me were figuring out the sanity system and figuring out how to deal with the gods, the great old ones and stuff. How do you handle those things? So with the sanity system, I I brooded on it for a long time. And what happened is that I was trying to figure out a way to. I knew that in the Lovecraft stories, there was things that would appear and the characters would be shocked, or they'd faint, or they'd run away or go insane. So I wanted to have the monsters be able to do that. So so initially I just say, well, this is another weapon of the monsters, is that every monster can give you a sanity loss. So that Shoggoths are scary, not just because they can eat you, but because you suffer a D20 sanity loss. Okay, and that was another scary feature of them. But what I hadn't realized is what the sanity system would lead to later on, because in my very first test of the sanity system, a bunch of players, they were playing the Haunting, the first scenario, and they go downstairs and they had this magic spell that summoned something terrible from beyond. It was a dimensional shambler. I didn't tell them that. So they cast the spell, and I say, oh, you hear grating in the air, and a portal opens and a clawed hand comes forth. And then the players said, one of them says, I'm running upstairs. The other one said, I'm hiding my eyes. The other said, I'm turning my back and going to the corner. And none of them wanted to see the monster because of the sanity system. And I thought, wait, in D&D, you would never try to avoid seeing the monster, right? You always have to know what's going on. But the characters in Call of Cthulhu, I don't know if the players were scared, but the characters were acting like they were scared because of the sanity system. And I said, I'm onto something here. I didn't plan it that way, but I said, this is really good. It makes characters act scared. And so then from then on, I doubled down on that and I made it work. And as far as the great old ones go, the other problem I had was at first I wrote them all up as like environmental effects, and not as creatures. And then I said, maybe they should be creatures. And I went back and rewrote them as creatures. I sent both versions to Chaosium, one after the other, and then they published both versions, which was probably not very smart. But so the original system had two different ways of doing every monster. Since then, I've decided that the environmental effect is the way to go, and that's how they are done in my Cthulhu Mythos book for D&D and Pathfinder.
So, I mean, you've touched on many things that I had planned to ask you about today. But no, it's absolutely fine. Like, I'm loving. I mean, I've got this stupid grin on my face because you are guilty for countless hours of absolute joy and pleasure in my life. So, and many people. But I'm going to say this, not because you're here, but I think you designed the almost perfect role-playing game.
Oh,
because.
Thanks.
As you and I'm going to explain why I think that is. It's not just because you're here. You look at Dungeons and Dragons first edition, second, third, fourth, fifth edition. They are vastly different games.
Yes.
The core of the essence of the game is there, but there's almost no compatibility between editions. With Call of Cthulhu, it is almost totally backwards compatible. I was looking at some second edition material, which I think is the game I started playing. And I've got the 6th edition book there, and it's like, you can just not touch anything and just play 2nd edition material with the 6th edition book. I think the only thing they got rid of was the famous resistance table. But other than that, the game design is, I mean, we don't need revisions and re-editions of the game.
Well, it's a very contrarian game. I mean, instead of fighting monsters, you run away from them. The big confrontation at the end of a scenario is likely to be something like pouring cement into an old well rather than a boss battle. When you get magic items, you don't want to use them. They're like, there's something bad with them. Library use is more important than combat, and your characters get worse over time, right? And in fact, instead of being heroic guys who are better than the average person, a Call of Cthulhu character is probably worse than the average person. They're twitchy and neurotic, and they have all these issues. They don't want people to know what they don't get renown or medals or anything. So everything about it is doing the exact opposite of what D&D and other role-playing games are doing. The regular role-playing games, of course, what they all have is the same cycle, which is you go and you kill the bad guy or defeat them, and you get loot and you level up, and you go kill a bigger bad guy and defeat him, and you level up, and you keep doing this until you're powerful. Now that's a really compelling cycle. It's fun, right? But in fact, the other horror games that came out after Call of Cthulhu, like Chill and so forth, mostly or Vampire did the same cycle, right? They were the regular role-playing cycle. So, and that's fine, but if you wanted something different from the normal role-playing system, then there's only Call of Cthulhu. Everything else follows the pattern. And it's not a bad pattern. I play those games all the time. But if you want something unique and unusual, Call of Cthulhu is it. It's very different. Your reward has to be internalized. You don't get a medal. You like,
No, because I started playing role-playing games with Dungeons and Dragons, and it's really exciting. When you level up, it's a really exciting moment.
It is.
And you see your character. But it comes to you get the power creep, and the stakes and the enemies need to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
Where in Cthulhu, the very first monster you encounter when you're fresh at the beginning in your first scenario is as dangerous or even more than if you play.
The weakest monster in the whole game is probably a cultist, right? And he's just as strong as you and better organized. They can be deadly. There's no like first level monsters to beat up on. It's like everything is bad. It's like, but the idea is because it's supposed to be like a horror movie or a horror story. And if you have a horror movie in which the bad guy is, say, a werewolf, you don't just go fight werewolves till you get to the boss werewolf. It's like that one werewolf can handle anyone. Nobody wants to fight a werewolf. And that's the Call of Cthulhu thing, is that
Yeah. And even if you defeated 50 werewolves, number 51 is just as dangerous as the first one you defeated.
Yes, because you're not better. Maybe you get silver bullets this time, but the game master probably has things to do to take care of that. And it's just fun. The whole point, that in fact, one of the reasons that they have the whole exploration and research thing in Call of Cthulhu is because I realized they need something to replace combat with for the players to do, because they couldn't fight the monsters or they'd just be destroyed, and so I mean they can fight them once in a while, right? There's occasional where it's okay to fight them, but a lot of the fights in Call of Cthulhu are not really battles. It's more like you're trying to get away while the monster is coming after you. They're chase sequences.
Absolutely.
That's kind of fun,
Yeah. With my current party, we always resort to dynamite. Like wherever we are, we need to find dynamite and just sort of drop it and run. It's the is the MO. Okay, there's many things I want to ask you, but you mentioned already the haunting scenario. It must be the most played RPG scenario ever written, and it's and it's fantastic because it works with single player or a small party. It's perfect to introduce new players to the game. If you got people that have played something else before, but they never played that scenario, they will enjoy it. I ran it a few years ago with 4 brand new newbies to the game, and they loved it. They got scared. It was fantastic. Where did that come from?
Okay, that came from one of the features in my life is that I get recurring nightmares. Okay. And when I'm having a night, I get a lot of nightmares. And when I'm having a nightmare, I don't like it, of course. But when I wake up, I go back and say, that was a cool nightmare. Well, one of my recurring nightmares that I've had ever since I was a kid is where I'm in a house, and I find a secret chamber in the house, hidden in the walls or in a corner somewhere, usually irregular shape. And I go in there and there's a yellow light coming through a window and there's a withered corpse at the desk. This is a very specific dream, right? This withered corpse is at a desk, and I go over to it, and then the corpse turns out to be animated. It turns around, and before it gets me, I always wake up. Okay, but there's books and things. So there's also, it's associated with libraries, and so my idea of undead always are these dried up corpses. That's my undead. And so the haunting was that creature hidden away in the house to haunt the house. And my idea was, I was thinking, in D&D, the classic adventure is a dungeon, right? And so what is the classic adventure in Call of Cthulhu going to be? It has to have some, obviously you can have a lot of adventures. There has to be some standard thing that other things go from. I thought it's going to be a haunted house. So I said, I'm going to make a haunted house. I'll put the monster that most like scared me in my dreams and work out what it can do. And then I was putting all the research things you need to figure out what's happening to make it more like that. And I guess I kind of lucked out that it was a great, it worked out to be a great scenario, but it's a very, it's a very iconic scenario. And it's also simple. It ends, and then you finish the thing. You've solved the Walter Corbett mystery. You can move on, which is kind of nice. So that was the,
but
it kind of came together for me.
But I'm sure you know much better than I can tell you. So many people got introduced to the Cthulhu role-playing game through The Haunting, and then they've DM'd that for new players. It's like it's a coming
It's
full
a great new
cycle.
player thing. It gets them introduced. There's no monsters for quite a while, and when there is, it's actually a monster that a group of players can probably dismember over time and defeat. So there is kind of a fight at the end.
Yeah,
But it also, I think, is a good template for their thing. So they say, I want to do another haunting, so I'll get an old house, and this time I'll put in it, a blob monster or something, whatever they want. It gives you a place to go off from, and kind of copy it, but not exactly, and still be fun for the players. And I think that's
No. I mean, you've achieved some sense of immortality there, because it's been in print in every single edition of the game. The Haunting is there as the first
Yes,
scenario.
I believe the newest edition, it's not part of the core rules, but it's still being provided for free as a PDF.
That's right.
I did tell Chaos and they were bad for not including it in the core rules, though, so they know.
No, I think that's a bit uncalled for on their part. It's so iconic.
It is.
So I've got a couple of questions here. I suppose, well, number one, I mean, throughout this conversation, I can already see that you had a love and an affection for the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Otherwise, this game wouldn't have happened. But also, I think the game really did capture Lovecraft's works. Those scenarios could be written out as a very classic Lovecraftian tale.
I am pretty obsessed by Lovecraft, and this started when I was 8 years old. That's when I read my first Lovecraft book, and my dad had it we were in a temporary house. The temporary house lasted 3 years, but whatever, we're there. And he kept he was a big science fiction fan, so he kept all his science fiction and fantasy books in big boxes downstairs. So I go through them and look for things to read, And I found this old book from 1942 called The Dunwich Horror and Others. Okay, so I said, I'll read this. It has short stories. I'm a little kid. I don't want to read a whole novel. So I started reading it, and it blew me. I'd never read anything like this. I mean, I'd read Poe and other authors, but this was really impressive. And then I wanted to find out more stuff by Lovecraft, because the introduction named other stories, and it only had like 10, 20 stories in it. And I couldn't find him anywhere. Lovecraft was not in print, until I was 12 years old. I got a library card for the local college library, and they had first edition copies of the Arkham House books of Lovecraft. So then I would check those out, and I was the only one that checked them out, because I could see from the library card no one else was doing it. And I did this until I was 15, and then the college found out that they were valuable first editions, so they put a lock on the books so that teenagers couldn't get them. So then I didn't have any Lovecraft again. And then when I was 17, my dad took me on a trip to New York. He was going to a medical convention. He was a doctor, and I was getting to go along. So while he was at the medical convention, I'd go out and look through the bookstores. And one of the bookstores had the new Ballantine paperback editions of Lovecraft with the weird faces on them. It had just come out. So I begged and pleaded to borrow money from Dad and Mom to buy these, and I bought them all. And then instead of going out and seeing New York and experience all the great stuff, I sat in my hotel room and read Lovecraft. And so the thing is, though, I've been searching for these things for basically 9 years, looking for Lovecraft's books. It was like a quest of one of the crazy guys in Lovecraft stories, trying to find the secret book. And I finally achieved it. Okay, so Lovecraft had become an obsession because he was so hard to find. When I wrote the game Call of Cthulhu, the only people I knew who'd heard of Lovecraft had heard about him because I had told them about Lovecraft.
Right.
He was really obscure. And so I think one of my greatest contributions to the world is not so much is that through my game, people have learned about Lovecraft. Like, people tell me all the time they've read Lovecraft because of the role-playing game. When I was at the Lovecraftian Film Festival a few years back, and they gave me an award, and they told me that the reason Lovecraft is famous today was partly because of Call of Cthulhu, which all the gaming fans would play, and that kind of went through this contest. And then 5 years later, Reanimator came out.
Yeah.
Okay, by Stuart Gordon, and that also, now all the film geeks were experiencing Lovecraft. So between those two aspects of pop culture, Lovecraft became well known. So I was happy to be part of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean,
Now he's
what I
like
found, yeah, I found a little bit heartbreaking that in my gaming party, some of them haven't really read Lovecraft. They've played the game for years. They will read scenarios or they will read campaigns, but it's like, oh, so what's your favorite Lovecraft novella? Oh, I don't know. I haven't read any. It's like, how is this even possible?
well,
I
I do know that Chaosium tells me that a majority of the campaign books they sell, maybe not a majority, a large number of the campaign scenario books they sell aren't played. They're just there for people to read.
Yeah,
And
I,
I can believe that, I
I
mean,
find
it's
it
a good story. It's just a different way of approaching. Really, playing a Call of Cthulhu scenario is just another way to experience a Lovecraft themed horror. You could see a movie, you could read a book, you could play Call of Cthulhu. All of those let you experience Lovecraft in a different way. I think all three of those ways are fun.
Yeah, I just find it strange because we're finishing this scenario I was mentioning to you before by Alex de la Iglesia. And it's like, oh, I would like to play Orient Express next. No, I've read it. Okay, I would like to play
They all read
Masks of Nyarlathotep. No, I've read that. It's like, what do you mean you've read that? What do you mean like you've spoiled the fun for everyone just by reading it?
Okay,
as if it
so
was a novel?
I have a whole campaign for Call of Cthulhu coming out this year. It's
All
called
right,
Big C, and
Big
it is
D.
big like SEE, like scene in English.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
and it's several hundred pages long. It's hardback, fully illustrated, and it's a complete campaign set in modern times. And one of the things it has uh, meth drug addicts and Byakhee and the Cthulhu cult, and that's one of the things. It has the Cthulhu cult, and despite Call of Cthulhu having the name of Cthulhu right in the title, there's not that many adventures that actually have Cthulhu or his cult. Mostly it's Nyarlathotep or something. It's someone else. I guess they don't want to overuse Cthulhu, but Cthulhu is rarely the big bad guy. Although he was in the very first campaign, Shadows of the Yog-Sothoth, which I edited.
That was my first campaign that I
First one we did.
played, but that was a crazy campaign. I mean, it was
It's
mean.
a very crazy campaign because it wasn't designed as a campaign. It was a bunch of separate scenarios that I took and then put them together in a line, and then I stuck my own scenarios in between to link them.
Because that's the one that has got one of the chapters is designed to actually kill a couple of characters, isn't it?
Yes.
The crawling, what's it called in English? I played it in Spanish, but the chapter 3, I think, where they go to Hollywood or they're at the hospital recovering from the previous scenario, and there's this sort of crawling worm that comes just to kill them off.
Basically. Oh yeah,
it
wants to eat everyone. Well, we I won't defend that, but I will say that Big C has Cthulhu cult as bad again. It is probably less deadly than Shadows of the Yog-Sothoth, but it's still, you can get killed a lot of different ways in it. It does include a helicopter chase with Byakhee, so that's kind of cool.
What could possibly go wrong, hey?
Well, you're chasing the Byakhee, and they're carrying big parcels of drugs. They're right with them. So it's all so it's full of fun stuff. Basically, Chaosium had said that they want us to do modern era Cthulhu stuff. Now, in our modern era, like in Big C, there is a section saying, here's how to move it back to the 20s if you want to. Okay, so for example, one of the important scenes in it is an unfinished super collider tunnel complex that you have to go into. And I said, if you're playing from the 20s, there's not going to be a super collider complex. So instead, it's going to be an abandoned subway system, which they would have. So it's similar underground tunnels with something bad in them. But so we tell you how to do it for the 20s, but it's designed mainly for the modern era, and that's what Chaosium wants. They want to do the 20s, have us do the modern era. I mean, they do everything. They do Middle Ages, and
Right. And I'm assuming that as every Lovecraft fan, once you've exhausted all his novellas and stories, you went looking for more similar.
Oh, I did, and I found Frank Belknap Long and Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch, and later on Ramsey Campbell. So. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Lovecraft is important not just because he wrote interesting stories with a new way to do it, but because he influenced so many other authors. He basically babied Robert Bloch along from the time he was 17 till he was a full-fledged author. and he was a great author. So Lovecraft got him his start. Ramsey Campbell would probably not have gone into writing if he hadn't been influenced by Lovecraft. And he didn't meet Lovecraft personally, but he's a great writer who got to start doing Lovecraft pastiches. So Lovecraft's also, he was very active in the Amateur Press Association. That's what they had instead of like a blog nowadays. Well, it was I used to participate in fantasy ones in the 70s. You'd have a book you sent around once a month, and people would add their own stuff to it, and then everyone would be chatting and interacting on this book as it went around. He was very active in that society, and so he was extremely influential, more than you'd think by looking at the few number of books he wrote.
And yet we owe a lot of his sort of staying power on popularity to August Derleth, whom a lot of people criticize.
He helped preserve Lovecraft. It was probably thanks to him that book I found, the 1942 book, I'm sure that was his influence getting that published.
Yeah,
because he did not let Lovecraft fall into obscurity. You may like or not like Derleth's own writings, but he certainly did a yeoman job in keeping Lovecraft well known.
Absolutely. And you incorporated some stuff from Ramsey Campbell and this, everyone else that you've talked about into the game. So obviously you had a vast expertise in all things mythos, basically.
Yeah, well, it doesn't take long to read all of Lovecraft. So you have to, unless you just want to go and reread them again and again, you have to find something else to read. So yeah, I mean, I don't just read horror. I also read other things, but Lovecraft's horror was my favorite kind of horror. I mean, I've read psychological horror and that kind of thing, but I really like the Lovecraft style of horror.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted your take on is obviously D&D, end of a campaign, possibly you've slayed the dragon, you level up, you are demigod or whatever. Call of Cthulhu, assuming you survive the campaign, the dungeon master's always like, well, give us they will ask, give us an overview, give us an epilogue, a send-off to your character. And it's never a cheerful one. Like, you just saved the world.
No,
you've defeated.
Tragic.
And I hate the fact that I've gone through hell twice, that I've survived, and that I have to give, like, oh, my character is an alcoholic in the streets of New York. Like, it's like, why cannot they ever have a happy send-off?
Well, I mean, you could, I guess. That's up to you and the game master. But see, the way that you retire from Call of Cthulhu is your character becomes a non-player character that they go to consult, and then later on he's horribly menaced or killed, and then you have to investigate his death.
It's never a happy ending.
That's your happy ending. Well, how many happy endings do you get in horror stories and horror movies?
No, you're right. You're right. The best you can hope for is to run half naked through the woods with a man waving a chainsaw up in the air.
Going insane is like the happy ending. You're not doing adventures anymore. Have you seen the Argentine movie Aterrados?
No, I haven't. No.
So the main characters in it are basically Call of Cthulhu investigators.
Right.
And it's pretty scary. And it starts off with a bang and it stays strong all the way through. And the characters are like, I'm rooting for them all the way through, but they're Call of Cthulhu investigators, so
what's coming.
They don't get the happiest possible ending. Look,
stuff.
If you want a happy ending, you can play every other role-playing game.
Yeah. Of course.
And you could have a happy ending in Call of Cthulhu. Just get your game master, tell them. Say, hey, if we survive, can we have a happy ending? Can we get at the end of the word ends up saying, that's what happens. That's one of the endings you get, right? But you can be cured if you go insane, unless you're like too insane. So,
one thing, if you want, if not, that's fine, is to talk about a little bit about the dirty money. So, A couple of months ago, I interviewed Ben Riggs, who is an RPG historian. He mostly focuses on Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, yeah, well, that's the big name in role playing, right?
Right, and so we were talking about how TSR ended up folding and being taken over by Wizards of the Coast. And
Yes.
so the conclusion was that writing
We were taken
RPG,
over a couple times before then, but yeah, that was the latest one.
yeah, that writing RPGs is probably not the best business ever, because particularly with your game, that first edition Call of Cthulhu sets you up for life. You could play that thing forever on the back of that one book that you buy. So,
well, yeah, not only that, I don't even get royalties from it anymore. So, but it did establish my career. But here's the thing: the payment I got for Call of Cthulhu may have not been that great. I did get royalties during most of my life. Just lately, I sold off my royalties to Chaosium for basically for the deal I have where I can do Call of Cthulhu Adventures. But the thing is that yeah, I didn't get paid for it very much, but it established my career. It got me on Spanish language podcasts like this one. Got to go to things. I was hired at the video game places because I had done Call of Cthulhu and other games. So it really set me up for life in a sense, in that I was, people knew about this and gave me credit for it. So I didn't profit off it directly, but I certainly am not unhappy about what I had.
no.
It also helped me set up when I established my new board game company, which I did call Cthulhu Wars. Everyone knew who I was and mostly liked me, so they were all interested in seeing my new board games. And that was very helpful.
No, and I get that, and I didn't mean it so much for you personally, but more of as a business, as a company.
It is, yes. Now, the way you don't make any money from doing the original game book. Chaosium sold. Being back in Chaosium, what would happen is we would do they did the core game, and then each scenario would sell about 35% as many copies as the core game. Okay, so like a third as many. But if you do 50 scenarios, then suddenly you're making a lot more off the expansions than you are the core game, because everyone's buying the right? And and role-playing expansions are pretty cheap to make. They're just a book. There's no plastic components. There's no dice. There's no box necessarily. They're very cheap, and so you have it's actually a pretty good profit margin. And even if you charge rationally for it, which you can do. So like my book, like I said, Big C, it's like 300 pages thick, hardback, full color, and it's not that expensive of a book. Yet I'm still able to make a profit on it. And then people have this huge 300-page book about shenanigans in the American Pacific Northwest, and I think it'll be fun for everyone. People that play it will like it. People that buy it and read it will like it. You might want to tell your players not to read it.
But here's a question then. So what's the appeal of buying the latest edition of the RPG and the latest edition of Masks of Nyarlathotep when I can go and get the first edition ones and play and just get as much enjoyment from that?
You got me. I mean, I think the greatest edition of Call of Cthulhu ever made was the 4th edition because it has my picture on the back cover. That's what I read. So yeah, I don't feel a powerful need to. I mean, if you're going to do a new edition, that's fine for the company. But I agree with you. I mean, if you're fine with whatever edition you have, then stay with that. And if you want to check out it's not like the new editions of Call of Cthulhu are that different, right?
Which goes back to my earlier point.
The edition is pretty different from the ones that went before. But the difference between 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, 6th edition, they're pretty similar.
That's right. This goes back to my earlier point about your amazing game design. That when I bought the 6th edition book and I look back to the 2nd edition book, it's pretty much the same game.
Pretty much the same game. Yeah, I mean, if you bought the very first edition back in the day for all its warts and problems, it plays Call of Cthulhu perfectly well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't need a new edition. I mean, that's also true of board games. If you're playing a tabletop board game, there's newer editions that might be slightly better balanced, something, but it's the same game.
Yeah.
Video games, it might be worth getting a new edition because the graphics get an upgrade, right? If the graphics in D&D are all inside your head, then those don't upgrade. It's just what they are.
So let's move on a little bit. So eventually you leave Chaosium, and like you mentioned, on the back of the strength of the product that you created, you venture into computer games.
Yes.
And which was the first game that you got involved with as a designer?
So when I went to Microprose software, believe it or not, the first thing I pitched was, let's do a game where it's our first person point of view, seeing bad guys like zombies and stuff, and you're able to shoot them or attack them with an axe and have them splat. So basically, I was trying to invent first person shooters without knowing anything about the technology, and they shot it down. Then later on, I work on Doom where you do that exact thing. But I actually had the idea for the first person shooter, but it wasn't done. So the very first thing I actually worked on when I was there was Sid Meier's Pirates for the Macintosh.
Right.
And I had to rebalance and change because the code was completely different from the Macintosh than ever previous version. So all the things were completely unbalanced and changed. I had to go back in and make sure I didn't program it. I just tested it and then gave it to the programmers to fix. And that was the first thing I did.
And then obviously we got Doom.
Yes. In 1993, I left Microprose. It was kind of falling apart. The owner had gone like insane and was doing crazy things. And so I left and I went to id Software. The first thing I did was Doom, and then I was like, hey, this is the game I wanted to do back in 1988. Sweet. So we had Doom. I worked on Doom 2. I worked on Quake. I did work on Quake 2, but after I left id, they took out all the stuff I'd done. So it wasn't there anymore. So you won't see me in Quake 2. But I went from, but I did most of the levels in Doom and Doom 2. In Doom, I did 20 of the 27 levels. And in Doom 2, I did 17 out of 32 levels. So slightly more than half.
And I've seen that video. It's fantastic.
My house? Yeah.
No, you teaching your granddaughter.
Oh, yes.
How to play Doom.
She's scared of everything. She's like such a nervous Nelly. It's sad. So I went to from there I go to Ensemble Studios, and I work on the Age of Empire series, Age of Empire 2, Age of Colonization, whatever they called it, Age of Empires 3, and then finally worked on Halo Wars, and then Microsoft, who had bought us in the meantime, shut us down. For reasons that probably seemed good to the Microsoft vice president, but I think were bad for Microsoft stock because we had never sold less than 1 million copies of any game we'd done. We were a clear profit maker. So, but shutting us down was bad for Microsoft probably, but not for the industry because we weren't killed, right? We we founded new games, Robot, Boss Fight. I founded Petersen Games. We went over and made all these new companies, and I went back to doing board games. And I think I've had some success in doing those. And now we're doing role-playing games again. So it's full circle. Here I am in my late 60s. I'm doing role-playing games again, just like I did in 1981. So
no, I mean, sorry, but it's a fantastic story. And so what did you find, or what were the differences between writing for RPGs and writing for computer games?
Well, computer games teach you to be much more precise. You can't just say the wall short enough characters can jump it. You have to make the wall short enough so characters can jump it. You have to know how high characters can jump. You have to know the numbers of every single thing. But the biggest change is when I'm doing a role-playing game, it's pretty much just me writing up the stuff, maybe later on with an editor. But in a computer game, it's even the very early ones, it was me, and there's programmers and there's artists and there's probably other designers underneath me. I was usually a lead because of my seniority, and then there's sound engineers and a playtest crew, and there's like dozens of people. The last computer game I worked on, Halo Wars, there was like 70 of us doing it. And I was just so everything has a huge army of people working, and so part of the work is doing the actual work, And part of the work is negotiating and politicking with everyone else to make sure the things that you think are right go through, or finding out from someone else what I should do if I'm wrong, And that's a big change from doing a role-playing game in a vacuum. I mean, when I'm doing a board game, I play test it and I get feedback from the play testers, but ultimately I'm the guy doing everything with the game, deciding whether things are good or not. But with a computer game, there's not that. That has to be a consensus.
Because as you mentioned before, first edition Call of Cthulhu, it's you with a typewriter a year and a half.
Yep.
And computer games these days are massive. They're almost movie productions.
I mean, the computer games kind of rise and fall. And then, initially, it was like when I first started working at Microprose, your whole computer game thing would be like an artist, a designer, and a programmer, maybe. And then they added a couple more, another artist, and then. But by the time I got to when I worked on Doom, we had 2 programmers, 2 artists, and 2 designers, all trying to do it. So it was a little bigger. By the end of my time at software, we were up to about 15 people all working on a game at once. But then by the time I finished Ensemble Studios, it was 75 people. And I've heard you look at the credits of some games, and it's like hundreds of people. Look at World of Warcraft, hundreds of people are on that game. But then when games started appearing on your phone, again, there were smaller groups again for a while. And so basically, as companies get bigger and bigger, it's more unwieldy. And you get a kind of a group think where you're not allowed to put in good ideas because someone will always find a problem with your good idea, so it gets shot down. A smaller group has the advantage that you can put through a good idea or something quirky, but then you're on the other hand, you don't have all that backup to help you make a game. So it's always a struggle in computer games to make that work, and it also takes years to do a game.
Yeah,
a year and a half. Whereas when I work on a board game, it's me and 6 months of designing and maybe a year of playtesting, and during which I'm designing some other game, and it's much easier. And I have to share the money with fewer people, which is also
there's always the optimal party size for any campaign,
exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah, you don't want to play Call of Cthulhu with 20 investigators, and you don't really want it with 1 investigator. You got to find the right number, and that's what I've been trying to do.
Now I play online because we are all now middle-aged dads trying to recapture our excitement from when we were teenagers, and I think Discord these days and online games are a lot more common than meeting with people around a table. And once we found a group of people, it's like, okay, we're staying together. If we open up a new game, we're not gonna publish it on the Discord server. We just restart a new campaign with the 5 of us. Once you find that optimal party size and people you get on with.
I don't know what the stats are for Call of Cthulhu campaigns, but I know that Paizo estimated that the average fantasy role-playing campaign group lasted 6 months. So they designed their campaigns to be 6 months long. That everyone's graduated from college, or they've moved away, or they've found girls or something, and they said it was 6 months. Call of Cthulhu might be longer. On the other hand, a Call of Cthulhu campaign is kind of odd because it doesn't really lend itself as well to a campaign thing. It's more like Call of Cthulhu is a great game to play in between campaigns of D&D or whatever, because they have a little one shot and everyone plays Call of Cthulhu.
I tell you what I find a little bit complicated, but maybe it's the fact that we only play once a week, 2.5 hour sessions. And when you're playing a long campaign, I think it took us, I don't know what's called in English, the Eternal Joke, or no, Eternal Lies, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it took us almost 2 years to finish that. And you get lost. I lost a little bit of the thread of the story. And there were a couple of, I think Call of Cthulhu is a little bit, because you got to go peeling the onion and you eventually got to get from point A to point B. Sometimes you can get a little bit stuck, whereas I think other games like Dungeons and Dragons are a bit more sandbox, and you got a bit more freedom to roam around the place. Whereas I think maybe if your DM
doesn't lend itself very well to that sandbox thing.
No, I think you need a good DM that if you get stuck, it doesn't seem like, oh, the DM just gave you the clue that you missed out in order to be able to move forward the story. And I think it's more complicated to DM Cthulhu than it is to DM D&D.
That is probably true, because D&D you can use random encounters, and you really can't do that in Call of Cthulhu. I mean, like, you roll dice, you meet a Shoggoth. I mean, that's not going to work. A Shoggoth should be a whole adventure.
So,
which is why we do so well selling our expansions and adventures. Because you do have to have all that preparation stuff, and there it is. We've done it for you.
Yeah, like you could potentially run a few sessions of D&D off the top of your head. Mm-hmm. You cannot do that with Cthulhu. You need proper preparation.
Yes.
You need to really think it through.
Yeah, you can't. Well, I mean, I can do it because I have like 50 scenarios in my head that I can just pull out, right? But I understand that not everyone can do that. And the reason I have so many scenarios in my head is because I am the author of Call of Cthulhu. When I go out to game, I'm never allowed to play a published scenario. You're the author. You have to do your own thing. So I never get to play one of the published. So I haven't played most of them. The last published scenario I played was Master of Nyarlathotep. And because my players don't let me, so I always have to have something new. So, and because I go to conventions all the time, I have to have a scenario to run at the convention. And the convention scenarios usually have to be pretty unusual and punchy and bloody to impress, because that's what they expect, right? They want to have all the gore. So I have this roster of adventures I do at conventions that I keep on my hard drive and in my head, that if someone says, let's play Call of Cthulhu right now. And of course, I've also gotten good enough at Call of Cthulhu that I can put together an adventure pretty quick, like in an afternoon. So one day I was in Germany and they said, we want you to do a special Call of Cthulhu adventure for all these 12 people. So I was like, okay, give me a few hours. And I put it together. And it's actually been published in the Petersen's Abominations book.
Wow. But okay, so I think you've preempted, but you obviously still play Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's my house game system.
Yeah, no. But I would feel mightily in awe like I'm not worthy of playing with you. Like, who are your regular players? Who do you play with?
Well, I mean, back in the 80s, I was playing with basically hangers on at Chaosium, who normally would be playing RuneQuest or one of the other games. And then they came and they played Call of Cthulhu with me. And I got a regular gaming group going, including Ben Monroe and other people like that. When I moved to Texas in 1993, I went looking for a gaming group and I got one. And we played 2 campaigns. One of the campaigns lasted 14 years and one of them lasted 8 or 9 years. So we had quite long-lasting campaigns here in Texas because I didn't move, and so my players like grew old and gray along with me. And I like having players that I know really well like that, and they all know me really well, so we don't have to. It's easy to. I can hint at things. They know what I'm hinting at, and they surprise me because they're constantly trying to, to pump me, but which is fine. Sadly, I am going to move to another state in a few months, and I'll have to start a new campaign. But the good news is that my granddaughter and grandson, well, I actually have 18 granddaughters and grandsons, but 2 of them are really interested in role playing, and so probably they will be in the campaign with Grandpa. So
please,
I don't put a limit on how horrible and gory I can make it be, but on the other hand, you can be pretty horrible and gory without making it obvious.
Please tell me you had some moment where you had some kind of father-son, father-daughter day at school, or grandfather-granddaughter day at school, where this is my grandpa or my dad and he designs horror games and you've scared half the classroom or whatever. Please tell me that's true.
When we published Doom, id Software had T-shirts made that had the Doom logo on front. On the back it said "Wrote it," right? And so I said, "Hey, I've got a suggestion." And they said, "What is this?" It says, on the back have something that says "My son wrote it," to give to your parents, and then some other T-shirts that say "My dad wrote it" for our kids. I was the only one that had kids old enough to wear it, but they thought those were good ideas. So my daughter would be going to high school with this T-shirt that said, "My dad wrote it," with Doom on the front, and all kinds of totally boys he was totally not interested in coming like, "Your dad did Call of Cthulhu," So
fantastic. That is great. So, do you think are there any decent computer game versions of Call of Cthulhu?
The first computer game that ever scared me when I was playing it was actually Dungeon Master in 1988 on the old Atari ST. I was going along playing it, and I opened this grate, and it would crank up, and then there was a mummy, and I was looking at the mummy trying to see what it was like, and suddenly the mummy raised its hands, and it shrieked, and I dropped my mouse. I was so surprised, and then by the time I got my mouse back, the mummy had killed me. But the game gets darker as you go on. The lights go out. You have to find torches. The monsters are kind of creepy. It was very crude graphics by today's standards, but it was the first time I thought that a computer game could possibly make things scary. Mm-hmm. And I don't think. I mean, there's the latest games for that are official Call of Cthulhu games, I don't think have been unanimously successful, which I'm sad about because I actually do get a small royalty on those. So I wish they were better. Corners of the Earth, I think, but they haven't been that good. So, and the fact is, unless they want to use the Call of Cthulhu license, they don't have to pay Chaosium a cent if they just use Lovecraft. Lovecraft's public domain now. Yeah. He wasn't when we did Call of Cthulhu, but he is now. So anyone can do it. Also, tragically, a company, a good game company, was going to hire me back in the late 90s to help them do their scary horror game, which was going to be based on Guillermo del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness movie. But then Universal pulled the plug on Mountains of Madness, so I never got to do that game. So that was sad.
Yeah, and so why do you think there is not being a very good? I can only think of one decent adaptation of Lovecraft stories into movie. And going back to the Spanish Connection, was an American-Spanish production of The Shadow over Innsmouth that was set in a village in the north of Spain.
Yes, Dagon it was called.
Dagon, that's right.
By not Stuart Gordon, Brian Yuzna. It was a very good rendition of Shadow over Innsmouth, I thought. It had the chase scene in the middle where he has to undo the lock on the door and change it. Now, they made the monsters have tentacles instead of fins and scales, but I don't blame them because it's harder to make fins and scales scary. Yeah. And tentacles is like an easy, let's make it scary with tentacles. But yeah, no, I quite like that.
I think that change of setting, and you're familiar with this.
That Dagon was also not a really expensive movie to make. In general, you can do horror movies fairly cheap if you want to. Yeah. And I think that was the problem that Universal had with Mountains of Madness. It was going to be an expensive, giant $100 million horror movie, and they weren't sure it would make back their money on it. I still wish they'd done it because it would be a great thing to have. But if you look at other horror movies that are really great, like John Carpenter's The Thing, which certainly has Lovecraftian elements, that was not that expensive, No.
Yeah, I mean, horror movies usually all you need is a bunch of teenagers, a haunted house. You make it for peanuts.
Well, if you want to do a really cheapy, crappy one, you can make it for almost nothing. But even by a little bit of money, you could, like, for example, what George Romero was doing, Day of the Dead, my favorite of his zombie movies. The guys came to him and said, "Hey, so Day of the Dead, you've seen it, right?" Yeah. So that was X-rated in America, NC-17, okay, because it's so gory. And they came to him and said, "If you can make this R-rated, we'll give you, I think, $2 or $3 million more to make it." And he said, "Nope, it's got to be NC-17," and he wouldn't take the money. So in fact, he could do it without that money, and it was still a great horror movie. Or you can look at Italian or, for that matter, Spanish horror movies. They don't have to cost an arm and a leg. Lucio Fulci made his movies cheap. I don't know how much Alex de Iglesia is getting for his movies now, but Acción Mutante, which I love, that thing must have cost just a few bucks. That was really cheap.
That's right. So what
And it's
do you
not
think?
teenagers being killed in those movies. You can have some more subtle stuff. I think one of the more expensive ones of late was the Underwater one with Kristen Stewart, which turned out to be very Lovecraftian. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't seen that one. No.
Even if you hate Kristen Stewart, it's worth watching because of the Lovecraft connection. And she doesn't hurt it. She just is there, right? And they're under, and I think that made it cost more because they're underwater a lot and there's a lot of monsters. But there is a treat near the end of the movie. So
why do you think that Lovecraft hasn't had really very good adaptations to cinema?
Lovecraft is incredibly hard to adapt to cinema. His movies are not cinematic. Let's take for example, Call of Cthulhu and Whisper in Darkness are both stories which largely take place in letters or interviews. Then nothing would be happening on screen if you did it directly, right?
Yeah.
Just like, and then he has things like the Color Out of Space, in which he has a creature which is literally a new color. Well, how can you show that? Well, the way they do it is it's always purple when they put it in the movie, but it's literally a color. A shape-shifting giant monster is hard to do. CGI can kind of do it, but making it scary is different. Lovecraft he wasn't writing his things to be easy to film, and they're not. And so it has taken a long time to get movies that can even be anywhere close to it. And Dagon did pretty well. Reanimator did pretty well, but that was a little more. Reanimator's story by Lovecraft is one of the more toned down ones. It doesn't have soup monsters as big as mountains destroying the world. But yeah, Lovecraft made no concession to movies in his stories, and that has made them difficult. Also, a lot of his stories are pretty short.
Yeah, but just like you, The Dunwich Horror was my first Lovecraft novella, and I think that's pretty cinematic. That deserves a decent adaptation.
Yes, and no one's done it.
Maybe.
Okay, yes, there was the one in 1971 with Dean Stockwell, but that was not a great version. They haven't done a good version of the Dunwich Horror, and it's a natural. I mean, Dunwich Horror is, in fact, in my head, the ideal Call of Cthulhu adventurer.
And
it even has a happy ending.
And it's got that twist at the end, that Lovecraftian twist at the end.
Has a Lovecraftian twist at the end, has scary monsters.
Yeah. I think this is a challenge for you. When you come to, because when you come to Avilés in July, and you're going to be sitting with Alex de la Iglesia, I think this is a match made in heaven. You need to talk him into doing an adaptation of the Dunwich Horror.
Well, I'll talk to him. I can't promise anything. But I wonder if we want to do The Rats in the Walls. That's a great story.
That got turned recently. Netflix did a TV show recently with Benicio del Toro presenting some horror stories. And I think, Dreams in the
I thought what he had in that was Pickman's
Dreams in the Witch House.
Dreams in the Witch House, totally different movie. Stuart Gordon did a version of Dreams in the Witch House, which wasn't totally terrible. But Rats in the Walls hasn't. Again, it's a hard one to do. A lot of the action is the guy having dreams or thinking about things or being nervous. And Lovecraft was a very internally oriented guy about thoughts and feelings, and he wasn't so much about rationality, and not so much exciting scenes that you can see. I mean, the big confrontation. I mean, the big bloodbath scene in Mountains of Madness, where a dozen people are torn to shreds, happens off screen. You don't even see it. Of course, you put it in the movie, you can see it. But.
Yeah. And what do they see in Mountains of Madness when they're flying off in the plane? What are they looking down on?
Well, see, that's another thing, because you can't show it because it's unthinkably horrifying, and they had all the implications. It's something beyond that other city. Something fermenting and fomenting there. And so I've come up with a theory, but I'm not saying it's the correct theory. And what happened? It kind of goes back to when I was first working on game Cthulhu Wars, where they said you should do your own great old one that you invented. And I said, why should I do my own great old one? There's so many awesome great old ones from these other authors. They said, no, you should. And they voted on it. And they said I should do it. So I made up a great old one called Gobogag. Okay. And I said, what Gobogag? He's a god that doesn't exist yet. And I remember reading in the Mountains of Madness, the guy talks about the moon ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Proto-Shoggoths and all these things. And I said, okay, there's a theory in science, used to be promulgated, that the moon erupted from the Pacific Basin back in prehistory, and that's where the moon came from. Okay, and then later on, life evolved, and right, that kind of thing. So I said, Gobogag, he's in the Antarctic, right at which is where they saw they saw the moon ladder. I said, Gobogag is the deity that doesn't exist yet. He will be formed, and when he does, Antarctica will rocket off from the Earth and form another moon, and he'll be the god of that moon. And of course, this process will melt the Earth's crust and kill everything, right? And so that's the threat that is lying behind there. That you can see that that thing is growing closer to igniting its furnaces and becoming and destroying all life on Earth. So that's my theory, is that what he sees is the end of everything on Earth when this thing erupts.
Very, very typically cheerful.
Yes, typically cheerful, and also very Lovecraftian in that all the things we did won't matter because we're just going to be melted into the magma at the end. So,
what's your favorite setting for or time period setting for a campaign? Because I'm quite excited. I haven't tried it yet, but the new Achtung Cthulhu, which is kind of set in Second World War, Nazi Germany.
Well, there's a lot of horrors that are going around during the Second World War, or for that matter, the Spanish Civil War has plenty of stuff you could do. You know, but I would say that my favorite era is always the modern era, and the reason is twofold. So first, Lovecraft was writing his stories in what was the modern era for him. He's not trying to be quaint and old-fashioned. He has aircraft exploration of the Antarctic, new astronomical discoveries, ultraviolet rays, submarines. He is constantly cutting edge science for him, right? He's not trying to write old things about flappers. And also because if you set things in the modern era, it's easier to make them scary for your players because it's easier for them to imagine themselves in that position. You know?
Yeah,
it's a more realistic setting. Now you can do it with other settings. It just saves time to have it be in the modern era, I think.
But
Lovecraft monsters are particularly obnoxious in the modern era because we have so many ways we're more vulnerable. I mean, imagine the King in Yellow with a Twitter feed, right? He would, right? Or someone trying to publish the Necronomicon online as PDF so anyone can read it all over the world. Millions of people can read the Necronomicon and try its recipes. Those are things that you didn't have in the 1920s that are really scary.
But this is my problem with some modern horror movies, is that they inevitably have to end up coming up with a reason why technology fails in the movie. Why is there no cell phone connectivity? Why is the internet?
Yes, I know the cell phone thing. That's stupid. I'm fine with the cell phones. I think it's bad that they always try to make the cell phones not work. I think that's a failure of imagination. All you have to do is get on your look. I wrote a scenario with this very topic. It's in my Petersen's Motivation. It's called A Voice on the Phone. And when they use their phone, Seth Auger was online talking to them. You know, they don't want to use the phone. It can target them. There's a Japanese have a couple movies where there's a bad guy on the phone, and they eventually have to, right. And if you find out that you can be tracked by your phone, which you can, you maybe want to get rid of the phone yourself. You know, you also have the great example from the movie Return of the Living Dead, right, where they're trying. You've seen that?
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay, there's a scene in it when the cops come to rescue the people, and this huge line of cop cars comes up, and they open the doors, and as soon as they open the doors, the undead swarm the cop cars and eat the cops. And then one of them picks up the microphone and says, "Send more cops." You know, and getting help
Oh,
is just the worst thing ever because everyone that zombies kill is now a zombie, right? So it's like you don't want reinforcements from the authorities.
yeah.
You know, and when you say, well, we have modern guns, well, of course you do. So do the cultists, right? And plus, the cultists may be in there with like the police chief. I mean, conspiracies are a bigger deal nowadays than then. It's easier to imagine that the mayor or an army general or someone is in on some evil deed, and then it becomes, you know, all those great modern technologies. Now, having a computer is pretty useful, but again, if he can think of the kind of viruses and worms that cultists could put on your computer, right? So what you do is you use the technology. Don't take it away from them. Use it to make it scary.
I like that. I don't think you're right. I think there's maybe a lack of imagination on how to
Yes,
deal.
you have to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of last things. I know I don't think you were involved with Fantasy Flight company and the board game versions of Mansions of Madness and Arkham Horror, the board games that they produced.
I was not okay. So what happened here is that they got their license from Chaosium after I was gone with them. I did work on the original Arkham Horror back in 1987 and
Right.
helped perfect that. And then the author, Richard Lanius, took it to Fantasy Flight, and they made their, which is far beyond what I did. They did a great job. And so I have not been involved with Fantasy Flight. When I did Cthulhu Wars, I went and met with the president of Fantasy Flight to see if he wanted to publish it.
Okay. Because I've got young kids now, so Arkham Horror is safely stored away for the time when they're a bit more grown up. But once I got the game going, it's like, this is just the RPG into a board game, but like all the rules, kind of pretty much everything from the RPG is in that board game. You got the sanity, you got the hit points, you got pretty much everything. The archetypes
that's from Richard Lanius, right? And a little bit of me, mostly Richard. Well, here's the thing. The one thing that the Arkham Horror doesn't have is that in Arkham Horror, every adventure is not identical, but more like you wander around Arkham collecting clues until you are able to go and solve the bad guy, right? You build yourself up. So as it happens, I have put together a board game, which is going to be published this year. It's called Terror Pass, and it's the official Call of Cthulhu board game. And this is different from Arkham Horror. It's my Arkham Horror, anti-Arkham Horror, in that every adventure is extremely different from each other. They don't follow the same pattern. You might have the same map, but you're doing really different things in them. One of them, you end up trying to run away from a nuclear bomb being set up underground. One of them has people having the brains taken out by the. And it also has a cool thing about it, which is that in Terror Pass, you don't have a turn order. The worst thing in Arkham Horror is waiting for the other people all to take their turn, or waiting for your turn. In Terror Pass, you all move at the same time. You discuss what you're going to do ahead of time, you know. So you don't block it, but you start. I'll go before you into this room, then I can block this monster. You can move past me. So it's a very different thing. Yeah, I'm probably going to bring it to Avilas. If you know anyone who's going to be there, maybe they can play it with me and tell you what they think.
Look, the problem is, I need to think about, because usually July I still got to work. In the month of July.
Oh, I understand. Not everyone can take time off, but you may have a friend. One of your friends might be going. You know.
Absolutely, but the way things are going, I might try my best to make it there. I've got some of my Cthulhu friends. They live maybe a couple of hours south from Aviles. So when I mentioned that you were going, he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna try." So we'll try. I'll let you know if we manage to get ourselves there. But going back to Arkham Horror, the way I roped in my last sort of never played RPGs before group is like, we tried Arkham Horror because sometimes for non-geeks, a board game is more socially acceptable than an RPG, because maybe you still got Monopoly or something like that in the back of your mind.
I think it's because, in a board game, you don't have to take time making a character, and there's no expectation that you'll be playing it again next week. Board game is one evening, one and done.
But so we played Arkham Horror like once or twice, and they kind of enjoyed it. And then I said, "Oh well, so would you like to try the real thing now then?" And then
Ooh.
we played The Haunting, and obviously, that was just like a gateway drug to the real
Yes.
thing. So for you, do these board games do they target a different segment of the market? Is there crossover, or is it an entry point for people to
I
then fall
think
in?
I think that most people that play the role-playing games will sometimes play the board games, if only because you don't always have your whole gaming group there for a role-playing session, so you can play a board game instead. I think that there are people that play the board games that never play the role-playing games.
Yeah, the RPG is one step too far for them.
Yeah. And I don't know why, because the RPG, it's not that hard to play. It's not like a Call of Cthulhu character generation takes hours, It's pretty quick.
Is it? I don't know. Maybe it's that lack of imagination of not having the physicality of the pieces and the board, and having this kind of sandbox thing approach. I mean, RPGs were very revolutionary when they came out. It's like it's a game.
Yeah.
It's a game, but
I was playing D&D back in 1974, the year it came out. And at first I thought it sounded really dumb. When my friend was trying to explain it to me, he said, "No, let's try it." Okay. And then that was it. We were off,
Yeah. I know. I've met so many people over the year. Well, recently on my channel, like people have been interviewing authors and editors and stuff that they started playing when the game came out, and they've carried on playing all their lives. I think it's a hard habit to put down.
Mm-hmm.
You may go through phases like yourself where you're going to move, you're going to find a new group, but
Yes.
there's something about them, about RPGs, we always come back to people that have tried it. I don't think you can just give them up.
I think RPGs are here to stay. I don't know what form they'll be in. I know that Ben Riggs thinks that RPGs are reaching a crisis and will have a problem with the manufacturers. That's probably true, but it doesn't matter because something else will be there in their place, even if only homebrew. Once people know how to role play, they don't need a giant fancy book. They can just play. And I mean, a lot of players nowadays, at least online players, seem obsessed with the rules and how do you do this kind of rule thing. And that's the whole point of role playing, is you shouldn't have to worry about. The rules are there to settle disputes, not to limit or constrain you.
Yeah,
that was one of the great things about basic role playing. So go ahead.
No, you're right, but that's what I've always been a traditional sort of sit around the table play. But now, because of circumstances, we play on virtual tabletops like Foundry or Roll20 or something like that. And because the rules are codified into that system,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more important. Well, you need to know what actions trigger what and what the rules are. And
Yes.
sometimes the platform will tell you, so you actually don't even need to know the rules. Once your character has lost a certain amount of sanity points, the system will automatically trigger a temporary episode of madness or insanity, whatever it is.
Well, I mean, any role-playing game is going to have way more complicated rules, harder to learn than in a board game. And
True.
any computer game is going to have way more complicated rules than any tabletop game. It's just you don't see the rules, you just experience them.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's pretty much. I mean, I would love to hear any more stories that you've got.
Well, I've already you've indulged me already for almost an hour and 20 minutes, so maybe it's time to move on.
No. I totally understand, and I really appreciate your time today. And thank you, and apologies again for the time zone confusion earlier.
No, it all worked. It was great. So hopefully I will see you or your friend in Avilas in June or July, whenever it is. And happy gaming.
Yeah, and we'll try to get a game with Alex de la Iglesia. That'll be absolutely brilliant.
All right, we'll see what we can do with Alex de la Iglesia. I certainly want to at least meet him.
Oh, for sure. All right, well, thank you very much, anyone that was watching. Oh, so before we go, so where can people find you these days? And you mentioned you've got a new campaign
Okay, so I have a
coming
YouTube
up.
channel, and I release a video every week, and it is called Sandy of Cthulhu. And my company is undergoing a resurgence and will shortly reappear, but it is not yet reappeared. I mean, we're still in business, we're still selling stuff, but so you can see the Petersen Games website for that. And there'll be some new websites that'll be coming out that we will attempt to publicize as much as we can. I also have a Sandy of Cthulhu Twitter feed, for what that's worth. It's more random than the YouTube. YouTube is pretty much always like horror related things. And Twitter is like whatever. I mean, Twitter is Twitter, right? So it's whatever I think about at the time.
Brilliant. So look forward to that new campaign, which you told me was it was called
Big C. Here, I'll type it in the chat.
Right.
There it is.
There you go, Big C. Fantastic. I look forward to that. Well, once again, thank you very much, everyone. Take lots and lots of care. And thank you, Mr. Petersen. And everyone,
Thank you. Take care.
Right.